Hello everybody, welcome back to American Textbook Reading. We're going over Lesson 4 today, Types of Animals. Types, many different types of animals. As you can see in this picture, there are lots of different types or kinds of animals. Some animals are big, some animals are small. Some animals move in a strange way, right? Some animals run, some animals walk, some animals crawl. So there are many different types of animals. In this lesson, you will discover animal groups. That means we can talk about each group of animal as being different or distinct, different from each other in some way. So we're going to look at six different types of animal groups. We can group animals into 6 different groups. Let's take a look. Let's start with the first group here. Now this group is probably maybe your favorite group. It's my favorite group because we human beings are part of this type, a part of this group. And this group is mammal. Okay, so what is a mammal? A mammal is an animal with hair that gives birth to live babies. Okay, well, these two panda bears, I don't think neither one of them is a baby, but a mammal has 2 distinctive characteristics. One, it has hair. That's the first characteristic. The second characteristic, gives birth to live babies. What does it mean, live babies? In other words, when a mammal gives birth, the baby is alive. It's moving. It's not like an egg. When an animal gives birth to an egg, the animal isn't, moving yet, right? It has to break out of the shell. So it's not really a live baby. Mammals give birth to live babies. The baby is moving right away after birth. So those are the 2 characteristics or 2 unique features of mammals. Okay? And we can see many different types of mammals. Okay, what's the second group? The second group is reptile. Reptile. And this is an example of a reptile, a kind of ugly but also a little bit scary example of a reptile. What is this? Looks like an alligator or a crocodile, right? So how do we describe reptiles? How are they different from mammals? Here we have a reptile is an animal that lives on land. It lives on land. It can go in the water as this alligator does, but it lives on land normally, and it has dry skin. If you think of most reptiles, well, this guy just took a bath, right? He's just coming out of the water, so his skin is wet right now. But if you look at most reptiles, like lizards or snakes, their skin is dry, okay? So they live on land and they have dry skin. Let's look at a video of a typical reptile. Do you know what type or what animal this is? If you guessed iguana, right? It is an iguana. This is an iguana, right? It's a fairly large lizard, right, as lizards go. Let's take a look at it as it's moving around here. Okay, he's kind of an interesting fellow. He's kind of a little bit active, but you can see the way he's moving around. By the way, another interesting thing about reptiles is that they are cold-blooded. It means cold-blooded means that they cannot regulate their own temperature. They are cold-blooded. Mammals are warm-blooded. It means mammals, we generate our own heat from our bodies. But reptiles cannot generate their own heat. They need a lot of sunlight. And look, he's on the rocks here, these white rocks. These white rocks are giving off heat. So he's probably seeking warmth in the sunlight. Reptiles need that heat to warm their bodies. Okay, if they don't have it, then they can get in trouble. Okay, so that's another difference between mammals and reptiles. Okay, let's move on. Sometimes we can see another type of animal. You might think, hey, that looks like a reptile, but it's not a reptile. It's an amphibian. Amphibian. Remember, PH sounds like F. Amphibian. Amphibian. So, an amphibian is any animal that can live both. That's the important point. Both on land and in water. So a frog can live on the land, no problem, but it can also live in the water, no problem. It's amphibian. It can do both things. Amphibians have smooth, wet skin. Before we saw the picture of the reptile and of course the iguana, the picture of the alligator and then the iguana, if you touched the alligator's skin or the iguana's skin, you'd find it's rough. It's not smooth, and it's dry. Especially the iguana would have dry skin. And it would be hard to do this. You have to be careful. It wouldn't feel very good. It's very rough and a little difficult on your fingers. A little maybe hurt your fingers a little bit. But if you pet a frog, and it's kind of slimy, right? But it has smooth skin and it's wet. So that's a good difference. Amphibians are wet, reptiles are dry. You could think of that in that way. But anyway, this is an amphibian. Let's take a look at a video of a frog. This is a little frog here. He's sitting in the grass and he looks like he's just hanging out. Doesn't look too interesting. Oh, what's going on? Whoa, 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 whoa. Wow. That's pretty cool. That frog just jumped up, okay? So frogs, of course, that they jump up like that. They've got the big long legs, but they're amphibians. Kind of a neat frog, right? Yeah, I hope he's not on my head, is he? Okay. Okay. Well, let's move on to the next slide. Okay. Also, we can group animals as birds. Birds are a group of their own because birds, if you think about it, they're unique, right? What is a bird? A bird has feathers, right? It has many feathers. We can see the feathers here. And 2 wings, 1, 2 wings. Most birds can fly. That's another key point right there. Most. It doesn't mean all. It means most. Of course, when we think about birds, we think, oh, they can fly. But not all birds can fly. Think about in Africa. There's a really big bird that can't fly. It's called an ostrich, right? An ostrich. An ostrich is a bird, but it can't fly. It can run, but it can't fly. So most birds can fly. Not all birds can fly. So these are birds. But all birds have feathers. All birds have wings. Okay? So those are the unique characteristics of birds. Okay. What's next? Insects. Insects are very, very, very common in the animal kingdom. We may not think much about insects. We may not think insects are very great animals, but there are actually a lot of insects. Insects are probably, and the different species of insects are probably more than other types of animals. Insects are probably the most common type of animal in the earth. But we don't think about them because they're so small, right? But what are insects? An insect, this is a good picture of an insect. This is a stag beetle, right? Very impressive looking creature. But remember, he's not that big. He's a small guy. An insect is a small creature with 3 body parts. It has 3 body parts and 6 legs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 legs. Insects have no bones. There are no bones inside of an insect. The insect gets its strength for its body in its shell. Insect shells, insect bodies are hard shell-like structures. So insects don't have bones on the inside like mammals or birds or reptiles do, or even amphibians. Okay, so this is an example of a stag beetle. All right, let's take a look. Here's another type of beetle here, and he's crawling along a leaf. You can see his head, you can see the middle section, you can see the abdomen, and you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 legs. He's kind of having a hard time crawling over this leaf, but that's a good example of an insect. Insects have 3 body parts and 6 legs. That's how you know it's an insect. Okay, so bye-bye beetle. Okay. Okay, so another large group of animals, fish, right? Fish, of course, live under the water. And again, we don't really encounter fish too often because we don't live in water. But if we go swimming at the coast or if we go diving, snorkeling, we can see fish under the water. And they're very colorful, very interesting creatures. What is a fish? How do we describe fish? A fish is a creature that lives in the water. It breathes through its gills. You can see the gills right here, this opening on the side of the head right here. There's oxygen in the water, but we can't get that oxygen because we don't have gills. But a fish has gills, so it can push that water through and take out the oxygen, and that's how a fish breathes underwater. If you take a fish out of water, can't breathe because gills don't work in air. Okay? So, fish use fins and a tail to swim. So the tail here and the fins, they use that to swim through the water. Okay? So, next, let's take a look at a unique part of certain fish and also reptiles on their skin. You know, different types of animals will have different characteristics to them. One interesting characteristic is a scale. What is a scale? A scale is a section of the skin on a fish or reptile. You can see this pattern. This pattern is very close up. We're looking very closely at the skin of a fish or a reptile. Their skin looks like this. It's in scales, and these scales sometimes will flake off, right? We have smooth skin. We cannot see scales on our skin, only fish or reptiles. So fish or reptiles only have scales, this type of skin. Very interesting. It protects them, and it's a different style. It's a different type of skin or covering for the animal. When we talk about animals, we can talk about their young, right? The young of animals, okay? So as we see here, we have mama sheep, right? And we have two baby sheep, right? Lambs. This would be one baby sheep. We could say young. So actually both of them are young. Young is non-count. We say the young of a sheep, the young of a horse. So young is the babies of animals, right? So when we say young, we're talking about the babies of animals. Okay. Now before we talked a little bit about insects. When we talked about insects, we said insects have no bones. Insects do not have bones. Now we're talking about bones. A bone, what is a bone? This is a very strange looking bird, isn't it? Actually, it's an illustration. It's an artist's drawing of the inside of a bird. Normally we don't see this, right? But if you could take away the skin and the organs, this is what you're left with. You're left with the skeleton, the hard, bony structure inside an animal that supports the body, right? If you didn't have the skeleton, right, there's no support. It would just, fall apart. There's nothing to be able to move around, right? So a bone is that's the most important thing of a bone, is that it's hard, white part that makes up the frame of the body. So the bones make up the frame of the body, and they support the organs and the skin and everything else that the animal needs to survive. So the bones make up the frame of the body, okay? And not just for birds, but also for us and mammals and many other types of animals, okay? So this is the bone. Bones are very important, okay? Also, it's good for you to drink milk to help your bones, right? You need a lot of calcium because that's what bones need to grow. And you can find you can find calcium in milk. So drink a lot of milk, it will help your bones. Okay. Now, some animals, remember we talked before about mammals? Mammals give birth to live young, but not all animals give birth to live young. I gave the example of eggs. Here we have a couple of eggs. This one is the normal egg that you might eat this one for breakfast. This one is a strange egg, looks a little bit different. And is it broken? I hope not. What's going on here? It looks like it's cracked, right? Probably the baby inside this egg is cracking the inside. It wants to come out, okay? So this is a different style of birth. Mammals don't lay eggs. But what is an egg? How can we describe an egg? An egg is a round shell, usually round, maybe not perfectly round, but roundish. It's a round shell where a baby bird or reptile grows. So it's not just birds, it's also reptiles. Reptiles also lay eggs, and they will come out. Fish also lay eggs too, by the way. So birds or reptiles will lay an egg, and the young the young bird or the young reptile will grow inside that egg, and then after a while they'll crack and they'll come out of the egg. Okay? Okay, moving on here, we have a nice chart. This chart is about animals and their characteristics. I talked before about characteristics or features of animals. Different types of animals have different characteristics or different features. So over here we have the type of animal. Remember, we were talking about 6 different types of animals. We have 3 of them here, and we have a picture showing an example, and just an example, not all of them, but just one example from each group or each category. And then over here we have a description or a characteristic that belongs to that group. So, for example, we have mammals, and we have a picture, an example of a mammal. This is actually, don't be confused by this picture, it's actually 2 polar bears. You only see the head of one, but this is the back of another one. Looks like they might be giving each other a bear hug, or one is giving the other a bear hug. But this is 1 polar bear, that's 2 polar bears. So yeah, it's a kind of an interesting picture. But this is a polar bear, polar bears. What is their characteristic? Hair or fur. So we can see that mammals have a lot of hair. They have fur on their bodies. They give birth to live babies. So when they have a baby, the baby is not in an egg. It's moving around already. It's ready to start crawling around, sometimes even to start walking around, depending on the animal. Okay, so that's a mammal. This is the characteristic of the mammal. Let's move on to bird. And then we have an example of a couple of ducks. These are ducks. They are birds. What is unique about birds? What are their characteristics? Birds have 2 legs, 1, 2. They have 2 wings, 1, 2. And they have feathers on their bodies. So if you describe an animal that has 2 legs, 2 wings, and has feathers on their bodies, you're talking about a bird. Okay? Let's move on to the next one. Amphibian. 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 Do you remember the unique characteristics about an amphibian? What makes an amphibian different, for example, from a reptile? Well, an amphibian has smooth and wet skin. So the skin of an amphibian, like a frog here, is smooth and wet. Actually, it's kind of, yeah, you touch it, maybe it feels a little slimy, right? But it's wet and smooth. It enables them, allows them, lets them, permits them to live on land and in water. So amphibians can live both on land and in water. Fish are not amphibians. Fish cannot live on land. Fish can only live in water. But amphibians can do both. They can live on land. They can also live in the water. Okay. Let's move on to the next 3 types of animals that we talked about, that we discussed. Here we have a reptile. We see an example. Looks like a lizard here. I don't know, is that a gecko, a type of lizard? I'm not sure what type of lizard that is, but it's an interesting, very fierce looking character, isn't it? It's a nice lizard there. What is the unique characteristic of reptiles? Reptiles have dry